Dan, can we start?
Yes, you're clear on my end to start.
Okay. Is the recording set?
Yes, it started. Give me 1 second just to confirm, but I believe it has.
Okay.
Okay, the meeting is being recorded and we are ready to begin whenever you are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So just to remind all the participants, please keep your mics mute. So we are starting in few seconds. So Prof, are you ready?
Yes, I am very ready.
Okay. Also, we have interpretation in French, English, and Portuguese. So please, the language that you prefer, and when you take the floor later on during the question and discussion, please put interpretation off so you not hear the interpretation while you are speaking. Okay, so with this, Prof, you have the floor.
Yes, thanks very much, Liwa. Good morning, New York, and in Africa, it's actually good afternoon or early evening. You are welcome to the very last of the three live interactive sessions that we're going to have on the discourse. We had taken a look at Nigeria and Cape Verde in the previous two sessions. And today we'll be going on to look at one of the giants of Africa by way of economy and other indices, South Africa. And I do hope that we will have a very great discussion because for me, as I emphasized when we were talking about Nigeria and when the Undersecretary General was talking about Cape Verde, we should really use these as a discussion point, more of a discussion dialogue, as opposed to questions and waiting for answers. We will very much appreciate your showing what you have learned so far. And in fact, if you are from South Africa and want to make intervention, it will be much appreciated that you're able to react to some of the things that we are discussing today about South Africa. Having said that, by way of a quick reminder, we are talking about situational quadruple nexus. Now, it may sound, it shouldn't be sounding like a big words to you anymore. Haven't been on this training for quite a while now. We have all been doing what is our concern here. We have all been concerned about peace and security and looking at how do we achieve peace and security. By the same token, we are doing the same with development, and we are doing the same with human rights and also humanitarianism. When you talk about those four concerns that I have put, that I've just reminded you about, some specific agencies of the United Nations come to your mind. Peace and security. You are thinking about the Department, the Department of Political Affairs and Peace Building. Also, the Department of Peace Operations. When you're talking about development, people tend to just think, oh, UNDP. UNDP and human rights, there is the Commission and the Council in Geneva. And humanitarianism, several agencies are partaking of humanitarianism, but the office of the coordinator is in New York, but you have WFP that is providing food all over the place. The whole idea is that perhaps we cannot but continue to think in terms of these agencies, but not to see them as silos on their own. The whole essence of the quadruple nexus is to identify those 4 crucial issues or concerns that are essential to make progress in Africa, but to emphasize that we should not be wanting to talk about development and just development as UNDP, or peace and security as secretariat, or human rights also secretariat, but with more of an independent standing of its own, that we should be breaking down those silo orientations as we start seeking to work together in terms of a coherent, coordinated, synergistic effort that makes things move forward for us. Of course, what I'm adding to all that is that we cannot focus on the quadruple nexus alone and expect that breaking down the silos and talking about it, it will implement itself. In that respect, we will need to emphasize that there are 4 other situational foundations on which the 4 pillars that we are trying to interlink consciously, on which they rest. And those 4 those 4 situational foundational issues are governance. Governance, instead of seeing governance as another pillar of its own, you are seeing governance as a crucial foundation that makes it possible for you to implement what we are talking about, to implement those quadruple pillars. And under governance, I emphasize leadership deficit or adequacy or plus, as well as corruption, which seems to be a pandemic on the continent. It's no longer an endemic issue. It's a pandemic on much of the continent. It's not the same everywhere. I must quickly point that out. And important for our purposes, and which has normally tended to be de-emphasized or not even talked about at all, is the fact that the African countries exist within an international arena, and the external dynamics that they face is equally very, very important when we are trying to discuss implementation of the 4 pillars, whether in terms of adequacies of support, because it's not that it's not wrong to think about support for, if you saw what the United States did at the end of the Second World War to pull Europe out of the ruins of that war and ensure that Europeans found their feet. Of course, the purpose was so that they don't fall by the way of the Soviet Union at that time. But those kind of interests is still lacking in dealing with the situation in Africa. I'm not advocating, but pointing out that those kind, but even much more problematic are situations that in which external actors destabilize some of these countries for their own reasons. And it's been documented how many African leaders that are wanting to think straight got assassinated, coups supported from outside, or various skewed economic arrangements or whatever. And then institutions. Institutions are crucial. We must always bear all those in mind, and resources. Resources, some have, some don't on the continent. What some have, like my country, is more than enough to be able to move forward, but we are not. But it should be, all these issues are long-term issues on their own, but they must be in focus when we are dealing with the problem of situational quadruple nexus. We're looking at South Africa, and with respect to South Africa, I would hasten to point out that conflicts have been a problem for South Africa, maybe not as much as it has been for Nigeria and Cape Verde that we have talked about before. But those key drivers of conflicts and problems of development in South Africa include corruption, which I mentioned earlier on, and unsettled land questions and conflicts, competition for money and power, and conflicts between rival ethnic groups. Well, rival ethnic groups and rival races. The race issue is still very relevant in South Africa, even though we must appreciate how far the country has come since 1994 in pulling together. Governance deficit remains a major threat to peace and security, development, human rights, and humanitarian support. Unemployment, corruption, inequality, injustice, violent crimes, and land conflicts are major issues. I'm being reminded that each of the participants should pick the best language that Liwa had spoken about earlier on, your most comfortable language. That we have English, Portuguese, and French. South Africa has been faced with repeated cycles of xenophobic protests. Next slide, please. Well, we all know, or maybe I should remind that it's been 28 years since apartheid ended, or apartheid as a policy, as a state policy, was put to an end in South Africa. The ANC is criticized of leading with persistent poverty, inequality, violence, health crisis, and corruption. Racial inequalities and socioeconomic inequalities have persisted since 1994. I hasten to say that I'm going to, down the line, show that South Africa has equally done quite a lot of positive things that we should be talking about, and we are going to talk about. An assessment of post-1994 South Africa by Afrobarometer in 2016 shows that, on average, only 37% of citizens believe that life has improved since 1994 on a range of socioeconomic indicators, while 24% believe that conditions have remained the same, and 38% that they have actually deteriorated. So that is saying 62% of South Africans are not excited about post-1994. The largest proportion of respondents see an improvement in race relations, positive. 52% see improvement in race relations, while only 17% perceive an improvement in differences between the rich and the poor. That's interesting. The South Africans themselves are placing emphasis on socioeconomic inequalities, and South Africa is probably the worst country now in terms of the statistics on inequality in the world. So 17, while only 17% perceive an improvement in differences, and that's a huge number. That's 83%, I think, 83% see the inequalities that we are talking about. And if you remember, the USG was telling us that when you run an unequal, non-inclusive, you run into problem down the line with all the other pillars. OSA, in one of its publications in 2018, points out that lack of human security affects the opportunities of individuals to exercise their rights and to participate in the development of their society. As human security refers to living without fear of insecurity, any insecurity, not just being shot at, or violence, whether it is political, criminal, economic, social, or gender-based. When security is lacking, there will not be peace, and this will affect the opportunities of individuals to exercise their rights to participate economically, politically, and socially in the development of the society. According to the Commission on Human Security in 2003, when people are lagging in political voice and suffering from inequalities and lack of various rights and fundamental freedoms and expression, there can be little human development. So all this is saying that we need to, next slide, please, we need to consider the import of all that. Of course, I'm pointing out that the South African government is involved in a number of initiatives that are appearing like very, very much focused on pursuing a quadruple nexus approach, even if it's not so called. It focuses on peace and security, conflict, reconstruction, and development initiatives, promotion of good governance, which would assumably take care of some of the situational foundational problems I mentioned. Under the APRM, which South Africa has been very, very activist on since the time of Thabo Mbeki through to now. South Africa has been strongly supporting the African peer review mechanism and protection of human rights, contributing to socioeconomic development through participation in the implementation of the new Partnership for Africa's Development. Next slide, please. Now, on the SDGs, South Africa has a national coordinating mechanism for national engagements and reporting on the 2030 agenda, that's the SDGs, and the AU's Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, and the Southern African Development Community's Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan in alignment with the NDP. As stated in its voluntary national review of progress on the SDGs, South Africa has 3 principles driving her commitment to the SDGs: collaboration, coherence, and impact. The principles of collaboration and coherence can be applied in the SQN approach, and or definitely the impact, because that's the implementation side of it, and that has to do with the situational foundation, the S of the QN. South Africa is leveraging on partnership between the government, civil society organizations, trade unions, private sector, and the academia. Of course, you have very strong trade unions, civil society organizations, and private sector and academia in South Africa. South Africa is probably leading on the continent in some of these areas. Politics and political interest is a major threat to the Nexus approach and SQN in South Africa. prioritizing political considerations over Nexus and SQN is a major drawback. Next slide, please. Prevailing issue, ethnic conflicts fueled by competition for scarce resources. I do not want to dwell on this, but most Africans are aware, because I gave the example of Nigeria in the first discussion, that we do have the problem of horizontal inequalities that worsens the situation. And this is very strongly so in South Africa. Horizontal equalities along race lines, but also on ethnic lines. And ethnic conflicts are often a response to the unequal developments in the country. And I want to make the same clarification that I did when we spoke the other time about Nigeria, that it is not, the problem is not because you have the Zulus and the Shonas or whatever. That's not the problem. The problem comes when politicians politicize these natural differences that should not be a problem and make a big deal out of it, and then give the impression that their own success to garner resources is the success of their own ethnic group. That is politicization of ethnicity, which is different from ethnicity itself. And it is this politicization that we need to pay attention to. Next slide, please. Another prevailing issue in South Africa is the problem of xenophobia. You are all aware of the many cases of xenophobia or xenophobic attacks in South Africa. According to a 2020 report by Human Rights Watch, even though the South African government launched its National Action Plan to combat racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, xenophobic attacks on non-nationals have remained high. Armed police forces using counterfeit goods raids as a cover for xenophobic harassment and attacks. In 2017, xenophobic resentments were supported by official remarks of the leadership of police of South Africa, claiming that the country cannot, quote, surrender to foreign nationals, and that the presence of foreign, quote, businesses is an economic sabotage against our people. This attempt at ethnic discrimination by state institutions is a recipe for conflicts. Of course, when the leadership are preaching this language of hate, they do not point out to South Africans the investments of South Africa all over Africa. In my country, for instance, the best money that MTN, a South African transnational corporation, makes anywhere in the world is out of Nigeria. And you have several other franchises that are, but all that, the focus is on people who are not even attacking the jobs, because the people who are saying taking away our jobs, to what extent is a medical doctor taking away the jobs of somebody who is looking for what to do on the street side? But this is these are issues that are disruptive overall to peace and security, and in effect affect other things, foreign direct investments and all the rest of it. Next slide, please. Well, I do not want to dwell on this. I've spoken at large about corruption and state capture. It is a problem in South Africa. It's easy for all of us to talk about Jacob Zuma government because that government has been really a lot of attention has been paid to it as compared to other governments with respect to kleptocracy in South Africa. But what is also positive about South Africa is that South Africa is showing the rest of Africa that you can fight this problem and not pretending to be fighting it, as is the case in my own country. By the time they decided that they were going to handle the case of a former president, Jacob Zuma, yes, it resulted in massive problems for the country, but nowhere in Africa is this the case. In my country, there will be talk and talk of it, and then it will just die down and nothing happens. But the fact that there are efforts to try to deal with this is trying to abhor impunity and, as a result, build on an aspect of the situational foundation. Next slide, please. External dynamics, I spoke about that at length. Of course, the racism still remains very much the case, and some of that is still having reverberations. I had mentioned earlier on the question of land and land redistribution, and the failure to look at history appropriately in order to deal with some of these may be part of the problems that South Africa will continue to face for a very long time with respect to the question of land ownership. And this is not limited to South Africa. It is the case. There was a video that I was looking at as to when the Americans insisted that Black Americans cannot buy property, and those who were working people that were getting the mortgages to buy and even permission to buy passed those properties on to their children, and the value that has since risen with respect to those properties continue to be a major differential with respect to income distribution, which school you get to go to, which is at times linked to where you're able to afford to rent or buy a home. Next slide, please. Effect of terrorism and insurgency on South Africa, an increase in refugee populations from across the continent led to increased migration, both legal and illegal, into South Africa, placing a greater strain on South Africa's institutions and infrastructure. South Africa's strong links with economies outside the continent, a position as a continental transit hub. South Africa sees itself as a gateway into Africa, and policing and border management challenges contribute to the rise of organized criminal activities throughout the continent, relying on South Africa, human trafficking, narcotics trade, greater investment in security-based responses, diverse, limited financial resources from other development priorities, heightened potential for lone wolf attacks, promotes increasing militarization of police, which could indirectly contribute to heightened tensions between police and local communities. And all these are the disappearance of peace and security. And as we have seen over time, peace and security, when it's nowhere to be found, you then start dealing with the lack of development. And with lack of development, it's more repression, human rights suffer. And when human rights is suffering, you find people having to move from their abode as internally displaced populations, IDPs, persons, and in some severe cases, refugees across borders. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The 2021 protests in South Africa, political and security issues fueled the protests that followed with huge economic loss. Angry Jacob Zuma's supporters took to the streets violently and destructively following the commencement of Zuma's 15-month prison sentence on July 8. In the KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng province, based unrest lasted for a week. There were at least 215 deaths. So many houses, businesses, vehicles, and properties were destroyed, necessitating the deployment of 25,000 army troops. Now, this situation, I must point out, people tended to just focus on the fact that Jacob Zuma was asked to proceed to jail, and then the people went up in arms. No, there are so many problems that were underlying issues that could allow the swift planning and success of the unrest. And these underlying issues are unemployment, poverty, and equality in the country. All these fueled on the problem of lack of development. It is common for governments to focus more on the advantages of globalization, expanding international trade, easy connection across the globe, easy financial flows, and look less on the disadvantages as expanding illicit trade, illicit financial flows, and transnational organized crime. Transnational criminal networks engaged in smuggling, trafficking in humans and illicit drugs, proliferation of small arms and light weapons are proliferating on international borders. These activities have been exacerbated by the crisis in the Southern African sub-region. The external dynamics of the problem. Next slide, please. Yeah, trappings of underdevelopment, poverty and unemployment, and socioeconomic issues. Poverty and unemployment create wider inequalities, a recipe for criminality of all sorts. South Africa's ranking on key development indicators, such as life expectancy, human development index, CPI, corruption perception index, SDGs ratings, terrorism index, fragility index, infant mortality rate, ease of doing business, shows some comparative advantage when considered with other African countries. So what I am suggesting is that the situation in South Africa is not comforting. We are not happy with it, but South Africa is still showing relative being better than several other countries on the continent. But it is important to point out that South Africa could improve in terms of some of these indices. Yes, please. Next slide. And, you know, I just tried to put together the rank of South Africa as well as the score on the Human Development Index, which comes out of UNDP, an important way of looking at the world that started in 1992. That's some some 30 years ago. I was involved in the 1993 and 1994 versions of coming up with the Human Development Index. And at the same time, interestingly, worked with UNDP South Africa in 1995 to come up with the framework for the South African National Development Plan in reaction to the Human Development Index. Next slide, please. This is still breaking down the Human Development Index for those who are statistically greater than myself. I've always been running as much as possible, even though I didn't have a choice as a political scientist in Nigeria to also partake of this, but just some breakdown to show how the different countries were calculated. South Africa, out of the 3 cases we're looking at, South Africa is still the best with 114, as opposed to 126 for Cape Verde and 161 for Nigeria. So South Africans can at least feel some comfort in the fact that we are by far better than the country that used to be called the giant of Africa. A giant, as some of my friends will say, a giant with clay feet. Yes, let's go to the next slide. Now, in this slide, just looking at some imperatives, and I'm suggesting that South Africa could benefit from the situational quadruple nexus approach towards boosting its SDGs achievements. Freedom from want and freedom from fear for South Africa is key to achieving true development and peace. And of course, when you don't have human rights, when you don't have freedom from want in terms of poverty, food, and all the rest of it, freedom from fear, the normal security issues, or such fears as your health. We all saw what the pandemic did to South Africa. South Africa probably suffered more than many countries on the continent as a result of the pandemic. The fear of such, all these hamper achieving true development and peace. Need for economic security, food security, health security, environmental security, personal security, community, because whether we like it or not, the politicians have politicized ethnicity, and people are beginning to count, even if it doesn't make any difference to their lives, that, oh, the president is from my community, the minister of finance is from your community. How come you have finance, health, works, so many things? Are you the only ones in the country? There is a need to be conscious on all that, since the politicization is already in place. But it doesn't mean that we have to totally continue to live on that politicization. Efforts must also be garnered to bring people into understanding that merit would pay the country more than giving jobs to people because of their ethnicity, and irrespective of whether they perform, able to perform or unable to perform, but just because of their ethnicity. Human security should be reinforced with national security. The tendency is to look in the budget and talk about defense and the police and whatever, and they normally get a huge portion of the budget in most parts of the world, but Africa, because the problem in Africa is such that we need more of the infrastructures that are already in place in the more advanced countries, that they are able to face some of these national security issues. There is a need to strengthen institutional frameworks for early warning signals, escalation response, and preparedness capacities. We just spoke about the 2021 a problem that South Africa faced as a result of several factors, and everything was so swift that so much was destroyed and many people killed. So if there is enough of an early warning and early response, because we tend to talk about early warning signals without talking about early warning preparedness in order to respond very, very early. If a riot continues to go on for a week, of course, more will be destroyed, as opposed to if it were possible to put everything under control within the first 1 or 2 days. And then we need to prioritize sustainable peace and human security. Next slide, please. SDGs for South Africa and other countries should be fully owned by the countries and well integrated into national plans and strategies, domesticated and adapted to the national context. It shouldn't just be seen as this is what the Western people are trying to force us to do. It should be seen as this will benefit us if we are able to execute effectively the 17 goals that are in the SDGs. I don't know if we can still continue to talk about by 2030, but even if we start now and put a lot of effort into it, then we will be driving our societies towards paradise on earth, which I call utmost freedom. The state of utmost freedom can best be approximated by the fulfillment of the 17 goals of the SDGs. If you could put all that together and get it done, there would be nothing that nationals or citizens of countries would be worried about. Of course, strengthening statistical capacity in order to aid monitoring is important, because we can just assume that things are working and we are moving towards the achievement of the SDGs without knowing the exact situation, but with building up on strengthening statistical capacity and the monitoring and evaluation arrangements, it would be possible to see how the country is going. Improving implementation capacity by improving institutional capacity, both systems and human resources. One cannot overemphasize this, and that's why we place strongly institutions within the framework that we refer to as situational quadruple nexus. Without the proper institutions, human beings are not going to get far. Since we have left the early stages of man, with complex societies, you need institutions to transfer vision into action, and to also build visions too. Institutions do that also. Proper planning, transparency, and accountability in implementation, and attention to anti-corruption measures. Without tackling the issue of governance in Africa, it would be impossible to expect significant achievement of the SDGs. We can repeat that to say, without tackling the issue of governance in South Africa, it will be impossible to expect significant achievement of the SDGs. And I thank you all for your listening, and we will now go on into sharing your thoughts as well as responding to questions you may have. But I keep trying to say that it shouldn't be the professor alone responding. Other members will have ideas. Other members know about their countries and other situations and can compare and contrast in order to benefit all of us who have been lucky to come together with the support of the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, Dr. Christina Duarte. Of course, ably supported by Kava and Liwadin. Yes, over to you, participants. Yes, please raise your hand if you have comments or questions. Yes, Jose M. Sanchez is the first hand I am seeing. Please go ahead, Jose. Jose, please unmute yourself and go ahead. You have to unmute yourself.
Boa tarde. Antes de mais, eu queria congratular com a iniciativa, ou seja...
Congratulations first on the course. I'd also like to praise Professor Badejo for your brilliant presentation. With regard to South Africa, a country with enormous potential, we all recognize this, but South Africa also faces challenges in fully achieving the quadruple nexus. However, the professor also mentioned xenophobia in South Africa, as well as terrorism in a very large country. With regards to this issue, what actions has the government done to combat xenophobia, which is detrimental to the potential, as President Mandela wished South Africa to be a country without these barriers? What actions does the government intend to take in this regard? With regard to the control of terrorism in Africa, in South Africa, in the central and southern regions, it's not easy to fight terrorism because terrorism in Africa are aided by live forces that are inserted in government. This is not a result of bad governance, and the vulnerable population does not receive enough attention from the government. Does Professor Badejo have any views on this issue of terrorism in South Africa? There must be strong work done. As a member of SADC, so I would like to know your opinion with regard to this issue, which has caused concerns in us as Africans. Thank you for answering these two questions.
Thank you. Eviano Silva. Unmute yourself, Eviano. Boa tarde.
Boa tarde, professor. Boa tarde a todos.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Presentation and yeah, all the good examples we have in reading and listening from you. While I was reading this and following the presentation, this is not a question. In fact, one country come across my mind, considering the quadruple nexus that we are talking about and all the way forward for the achievement of the SDG objectives. But particularly as we spoke about Cape Verde example, and there are many other countries in Africa that are doing a very good job in this pursuing the SDG objective. But my particular attention is while I was reading about South Africa, I just want to ask Professor and the team, would be not interesting to check on the and how do you say the country the country of the sorry, just forgot about it.
The country of who?
It's one of the neighboring country of South Africa. I mean, the
Mozambique, Namibia, Botswana.
The one with the general in power for many years, and the one that faced the genocide issues, you know, in terms of security problems that are now in a good Rwanda in this case. Yeah, I believe Rwanda could be one of the examples, perhaps to explore and see, because why do I think of it? They had like a past, a very bad experience in the past with these genocide things, and even the same issues we are facing now as a country with late the development issues. But now I believe they are in a good path, maybe just in terms of comparing and taking some of the lessons. How did they manage to overcome the issues of security and even the development itself? Could be one of the good examples, as we saw for the Cape Verdean, and they are perhaps Senegal also. Some of the other countries are very good example for us to rely on and check on the examples and see what is best to learn from them. This is one of the comments I just want to share with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. This could be, unfortunately, we don't have the kind of arrangements whereby everybody is called upon to present, or a group to present. Maybe it could be useful to look at some cases and so look at what is working in Rwanda, what is not working in Rwanda, because we must not totally assume that everything is super duper. And I know that you didn't mean that.
Of course.
You didn't
Of
mean
course
that
not.
either. So it would be interesting to focus and pay attention as to what is happening there. I have probably visited there 2 or 3 times, and yes, I found some of the things on the ground interesting, and there is no doubt that, as the USG pointed out the other time, and that's why I keep saying that we should not be talking about quadruple nexus alone. We should be talking about quadruple nexus within the environment in which it is situated, hence the situational quadruple nexus. The USG pointed out at the end of her speech the other time that leadership and leadership and leadership. Leadership is crucial. It's not all that you have a leader that has vision and able to set about implementing such a vision, and being able to get people to go along with that overall vision has been useful with respect to Rwanda. But like I said, there are different aspects of Rwanda that we need to also put into focus as to the extent of its overall achievements. But no doubt from what happened, the genocide and coming out of it strongly has been very, very important. Now, I was asked by Jose on xenophobia. What actions has government done to combat xenophobia? It would have been great if sorry, I thought it was, yes, it was Jose that asked that. It would have been great if any of our colleagues from South Africa could actually address this issue of xenophobia, because we, the rest of us on the continent, each time there is the flare up, get very, very concerned. And there is overreaction. The last time it took place, the 2021 one that was being talked about, you found a situation where Nigerians in some of the cities decided that they were going to burn down ShopRite, MTN entities, and several other investments of South Africa in other parts of in other parts of Africa, in that case, Nigeria. But the perhaps part of what fueled such a reaction was what I referred to in terms of the direct comments of some police commanders who came out and saw nothing wrong in xenophobia once it is against the others. Of course, you have many reasonable leaders who are calling to question the feeling that somebody has come over to take your job that you don't even have the qualification to do. I gave the example of a medical doctor, or I gave the example of most of quite a good number of the Nigerians in South Africa are professionals, but a number also are traders. But trading, it's been found out in other places that it's not a joke that somebody is able to procure several needs, logistical needs of other countries from different parts of the world and make it available without much hassle. but it requires a lot of intellectual capacity as well as capital to do a number of these things and whatever. But the tendency as a result of the problem of lack of development, the easy way and the inequalities, because the people who are really making the big money in South Africa are not other Africans who are at the low end. What do you call them? Lower middle class, if you can talk about middle class at all. It is the people who have acres upon acres of land that has airstrips within them and fantastic lives that you will say, you will be shocked that, no, this cannot be in Africa. But definitely the government has been trying to combat xenophobia each time it arises. On terrorism, I don't know if there are others who may be willing to make comments, but every government on the face of the earth talk about being against terrorism. Whether they really are is another thing, because I'm glad that Jose pointed out that it's not just a question of trying to fight the control of terrorism, but you have situations in which the terrorists themselves are embedded within the ruling party or the government that is in power, and are part of the beneficiaries, whether it is it's coming out of other things like moving narcotics or weapons across the continent and things like that. But yes, I don't know. Of course, I'm going to eagerly take Miss Varela, but hoping that we will have some South Africans. I did approach one on a private email as to if that particular person could make an intervention of about 10 minutes or 5 minutes to educate us and share knowledge about the situation in South Africa. But I didn't get a response from that particular person. But if any of the South African, because I know that there are a few participants from South Africa would want to share more knowledge, we would highly appreciate. Yes, Miss Varela.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry, Professor. I'm not from South Africa.
I know you are from Cape Verde.
Yes, I am. It's a very hot day here, very, very hot. But thank you, Professor, for sharing with us the case study from South Africa. It has been so rich. Honestly, this is also an opportunity to politically integration and knowledge integration. That's also what we need in our continent. And we stay in our own countries and we really don't have the awareness of the situation that we have in other countries. So thank you, Professor, for this opportunity. It's not a question, a direct question, but it's a comment, because when we listen from South Africa, of course, we see ourselves in many of the questions that you raised, but more than ever, I think the SDGs is a social revolution that the communities and the citizens should appropriate for it. I think we also must have the awareness that this revolution will not start from top down, that our communities, it's a revolution from down up. So this is why I have a faith in civil society. I think that all the revolution that we want to see right now, we need a very strong civil society. We need a civil society to make sure and to monitor the SDG implementation. Professor, that's why you in your presentation, you referred to a very interesting instrument that I would like to call our attention, which are the national voluntary reports that countries should present to the United Nations regarding to the implementation of SDGs. So how important it is for us as communities, for us as civil societies, for us an organization to monitor our governments. As you said in your last presentation, we cannot let the governments be the only important player on implementation of SDGs. I think that we got into a conclusion at this point that the governments, they are one of the very, very important players in this revolution, but they're not the only one. The private sector has a very important role. The civil society has important roles. And when you talk and you refer to the human rights, it's important for countries to revise their legislation about freedom of speech and freedom of association. I think we have to make sure that citizenship, that not only the governments can honor the SDGs and their own agenda and their own public policies, but that communities take advantage of it. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thanks a lot, Ms. Varela. Liwa, I don't know if we have comments from the chat or questions from the chat that you can quickly share with the rest of us, because some of us want reading up the chat. Liwa?
Yes, thank you, Prof. So I'm going through the chats and it seems that most of them are comments, not questions. So I don't see any question in the chat for now. Thank you.
Yes, but there are interesting comments that you can read to the larger audience.
Okay, there was a comment about South Africa, and then he says that I think that the case of South Africa shows the somewhat artificial binary construct of a state in conflict versus a state in peace. There is no large-scale ethno-racial conflict in South Africa, which is so negative peace. However, the sporadic outbreak of xenophobic violence, the recent July 2021 arrest and looting, and the persist nationwide criminal violence and insecurity means that South Africa is certainly not at peace as an absolute state condition. So when looking at the 4 approach pillar, perhaps it is about the degree of conflict or peace that is a determinant of the degree to which development, human rights, and humanitarianism can be operationalized and implemented. The South Africa case, I think, also shows that alternation in one pillar, like the declining development gains, will impact upon the other pillars, like rising social insecurity and criminal violence. The South Africa case also shows how important foundational governance issues are. Alternation in governance, for example, state capture, can derail gains. So yeah, this is, I think, the major comment in the chat.
Great. Thanks a lot.
And I see a raised hand.
Yes, I was going to take Astrigilda Silva. Astrigilda Silva, you can unmute yourself and please.
Boa tarde. Boa tarde a
Boa
todos.
tarde.
A minha
Good afternoon,
pergunta
everyone.
é uma
My
coisa
question,
pequena e simples. Uma
actually, it's
preocupação
not
dos
something
ataques
really
aos
simple.
cidadãos
It is a
estrangeiros
concern
que
with
acontecem
regard
na
to
África do
foreign
Sul.
attacks.
É
This is a point of
séria
concern for
preocupação
South Africa,
que é o
and
crime,
it is also a huge problem faced by the
aumento
population,
do
which is
desemprego,
crime itself or the
e
increase of
vários já disseram
unemployment.
aqui
In other words,
na
many,
fala.
many problems, as it was mentioned by
Essa é a única
Professor
questão que eu queria saber.
uh,
Muito obrigada.
Badejo. This was my question. This is what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks for your comment question. You are raising, of course, the problem of unemployment being very high. You rightly noted would affect several other factors, the rate of crime, and other problems dealing with the question of lack of peace and security. And when there is lack of peace and security, you tend to have a very strong government reaction, government getting itself ready to put down people who it sees as being opposed to it, and all these hamper development, and you continue in a vicious circle in which there is no development and there is no peace, and then there is further a problem of what do you call it? Additional problems on human rights, on humanitarianism being something of the day. Of course, South Africa has done reasonably well on the question of terrorism. It's not as strong as in other parts of the continent, maybe even suggesting that South Africa may be exporting some of the organized crime situations to other parts. I'm wondering if there are other comments in Portuguese that or in French that either Rita, Dr. Rita Canero or Ms. Dan Ensea can share with the larger audience that couldn't pick up those languages from the chat. But meanwhile, we can have Olivier make contribution. If you can unmute yourself, Olivier.
Thank you, everyone. I come from Chad. I'd like to make some comments based on what Professor Badejo said. The challenges that South Africa faces, namely corruption, governance deficit, face other countries in Africa. But for me, the key challenge is corruption. Corruption has been institutionalized. And this starts right from the top hierarchy to the bottom. It is extremely difficult for many African countries to attain sustainable development goals if they do not resolve the challenge of corruption, it will also be very hard to implement the 4 pillars we've been talking about since the beginning of the course. My second comment is with regard to governance. I have talked about political will, political commitment earlier on. If we have weak institutions that are meant to serve people, when in reality you should have people working for the state. So if you reverse this trend, it will be difficult to implement the pillars that we've been referring to. And a question comes to my mind: which mechanisms can we put in place generally in Africa to effectively combat corruption? I'm talking about systems that would improve our fight against corruption, even if our national authorities do not have the political will to combat corruption. Sometimes you get the impression that if there's no external pressure, then corruption continues to be rife at all levels. How do we combat corruption that is a pandemic, as you said? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I would say this was also an issue that the USG was asked the other time, and she suggested the importance of technology. I've written a little bit on corruption also, and I agree totally with her on the question of technology can make it more and more difficult or can aid transparency. But I then pointed out in my reaction to her that it is not just a question of technology exposing where the drains are taking place, where the thefts are taking place, but you have a political setup, a government, functionaries, whether from the president down the line, who are not interested in implementing anything that's going to even serve the purpose of realizing impunity. In some cases, those in government themselves are very much deep in the whole affair, that for you to have a headway in spite of all the advance notices you are getting from technological effort, all will come to nothing. But part of the problem that I have is that we are talking about this now, but you have aid agencies of the United Nations or the African Union coming as international civil servants. And they say, oh, if we do 1, 2, 3, we are going to have the quadruple nexus, synergy, everything, you know, but they can see the corruption that is making all what they are talking about impossible to achieve, but they are unable to articulate or point them out. And yes, when it pleases the foreign governments, they talk about corruption, but quite a good number of them are receiving these funds and keeping these funds that African leaders are stealing, and they are aware, and they also end up using it against them, because if you know that the other president knows how much you and your cohorts have stolen and are keeping in his country, and you want to act tough, you only need to be reminded that your money will be seized, you know, if you continue along this path, and you would immediately capitulate. So we do have I agree with you. I have been debating within myself the question of corruption and leadership, but I have decided to rank leadership first. That if you have a leadership with vision, a leadership that's able to stand up to it and determined to have a legacy, because many of the African leaders are not interested in any legacy other than to steal as much as they can for family that are yet unborn and generations that will never even be able to consume what they are stealing. So if you have a leadership that is genuinely wanting to fight corruption, yes, we can. Let me not talk too much because I'm now seeing a number of hands and we are running out of time. Maria de Luz Fortes. Please unmute and speak up.
Very good afternoon to all. My name is Benicia from Cape Verde. I'd like to greet all the participants and Professor Badejo. I'd like to ask a question and say that South Africa is more developed. Still, the country continues with social inequality, violence. What can be done to establish a balance based on the Nexus? That would be my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Abdurrahman Fofana.
Thank you very much, Professor. First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Abdamnel Fofana from Guinea-Bissau, currently in Portugal. My question is not really a question, but rather a comment with respect not only to South Africa, but to Africa in general. To me, the quadruple nexus is based on the 4 pillars. These are issues that focused on the problems of Africa based on these 4 pillars. I think that the nexus is a very long way for us to embark on collectively in the countries that we have studied so far, not to mention Africa in general. Most African countries that we studied so far faced a very serious problem with respect to the fundamental requirements for development, which is peace and security, good governance, rule of law, justice and security. I feel that all of Africa face similar problems with a few differences, local differences, but all face security issues. They face problems that put their security at risk. Without peace and security, we cannot talk about development. Lack of organization creates threats to development. I would ask Professor Badejo what we studied so far. How can we reconcile in those countries that face these problems? How can we reconcile these four pillars as not just problems that the countries that we studied so far face? Thank you, Professor.
Well, thank you very much. Your question is also very similar to the one by Maria de Luis Fortes. Lamine Sanko. Let me take Lamine. We are running out of time. Lamine, please unmute. Lamine Sonko, please unmute.
Good afternoon, Lamine Sonko from Guinea-Bissau. Can you hear me well?
Yes, yes, we can.
I have just a comment. Thank you, Professor, for the lecture, for the knowledge that you are imparting to all of us. My main concern is what we see in Africa, the promotion of tourism, which is expanding from country to country. What we heard about South Africa and the issue of terrorism, we can see not just in South Africa, but it's been expanding to other countries. There are issues of poverty and inequality in South Africa that Nelson Mandela worked on with respect to the equality of races and the issue of violence. Nelson Mandela left a very important legacy for all of us Africans. We owe Nelson Mandela for his leadership in this regard. We are branches from the same tree. The leadership that we saw in Africa, the son of that of a country is not helping that country. There is much violence. When we talk about the Nexus, we cannot work with the issue of security and human rights and development without equality among people. There is a lot of disorganization. First, we need to work on leadership. And we need to look at how to deal with corruption. Because corruption is structural in Africa. I can mention Guinea-Bissau. Everyone wants to govern. Everyone wants to be ahead. And there is a lot of corruption in the state apparatus. Everyone wants to be ahead. Everyone wants to be in power. And because there is no justice, everything that's done has to be, a person has to be accountable for. But there are persons who want to be ahead without being properly qualified to do so. How can we work on the issue of terrorism that is spreading in Africa? Thank you.
Yes, I would easily round up that the whole essence of the course is to answer the questions that the last three speakers have posed. And that is to address progressive change in Africa using the SQN. It's not just the quadruple nexus alone, it is also finding answers to the situational foundations within which those nexus operate. And the fact that people are eagerly calling attention to this, the fact that people are thinking what can be done to fight corruption, it means we need to fight impunity. And the example of South Africa that we have used, I have pointed out, has shown that, yes, you can fight impunity, because Zuma was first fought when he was in power as vice president of Thabo Mbeki, and Thabo Mbeki was wanting to discipline Zuma, but Zuma used the party to remove Thabo Mbeki. And that problem dragged along. After he had removed Mbeki, he himself became the president and still got involved in a different line of corruption with respect to the Gupta family and state capture and all the rest of it. And down the line, justice caught up with at least one person, which is then giving the impression that we cannot avoid what you call it. We cannot avoid dealing with these problems. So what I'm trying to suggest is that if we take the eight, we should focus on the 8 issues under the SQN and not just 4. We focus on the pillars, but we also focus on the 4 situational foundations. What is happening with respect to the leadership? What kind of leadership is Africa throwing up? And what can we do as a country, in each one of your own country, to improve the quality of leadership, to ensure that the leadership that we are getting is on the basis of merit as opposed to family affiliation and all the rest of it? How can we fight corruption if we put in place several technological, and if you pick up the UN Convention Against Corruption, it has many things that are to be done, but governments ignore them. What can we do to fight and ensure that this is done? And Ms. Varela spoke about civil society. Civil society are fighting corruption in Nigeria. They are constantly going to court, loading up the court with the corruption of the government without fear, and ready to sacrifice all to face the government that is not interested in punishing anybody for corruption. They capture some people and say, oh, we have arrested this, he has stolen 45 billion. Then the president himself go to shake hands with him because he's ready to come over to the president's party. And that's the end. Actually, in one case, the Attorney General of the country filed a nolle prosequi, no basis to prosecute anymore. There is no paying back on what even has been stolen. We must look at this totality and disaggregate, trying to figure out what can we do to improve the situational foundation before we can be talking about having the pillars work together. We have gone beyond by 4 minutes, but I can quickly take Felisberto Moreira, if you can limit your question so that Maria Doseu can also quickly say something, and we round up. We are already over by 5 minutes, and in the UN, these things are very much regulated because several people who are being kind and interpreting for us, and those who are handling the technical side of it, they may be having other jobs to go on to. Felisberto, quickly, please.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you for your presentation. I won't pose any questions, just a quick comment. The road ahead is very long in Africa. Our problems that have been identified and mentioned with regard to South Africa affect most of African countries. We need to continue this work to raise awareness, provide information regarding African leaders, so that little by little we can contribute to a change in behavior. If there is no political will, if we do not have leaders with the capacity to change things, all of this effort will be for naught. We need capable leaders, and we need to ensure that all that raise to power to deal with the issues, problems that people face. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felisberto. Maria de Seu, if you can take 1 minute, please. Please unmute Maria do Seu Alves Borges.
Hello. Good afternoon. I'm speaking from Cabo Verde, and I'd like to pose a brief question. Knowing that corruption is deleterious to economic and social development, not just in African countries, my question is, what strategy has been adopted by the international community to force political power in Africa to use resources on the social and economic development of their countries, as the donor countries provide these resources? So what strategy does the international community has adopted to avoid corruption? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vince Saba, 2001. Last question, please, or comment. Vince Saba, 2001, please. Please speak up. Yeah, thanks. Please speak.
Yes, very quickly. Joseph Fernandez, Guinea-Bissau. My question is, I put it in the chat box, but I will read it. Sorry. How can we conciliate the aspect related to the quadruple nexus, both in South Africa as well in the Sahel region, which have been a priority for United Nations, especially in the matter of fulfillment of the implementation of human development objectives, taking into account the challenges inherent of the reality of those situations? I mean, for me, it's difficult for me to understand that these countries should implement their strategy in implementing the ODG as the same way as the some European country or even African country. Thank you, Professor.
Well, okay. Thank you very much, everybody that has commented and contributed. We should continue this dialogue on the EDEP platform. We still have some time left to do that because we have far exceeded the time allotted. Maria de Seu had asked what has been put in place. It's not that there aren't things put in place. I spoke about the UN Convention Against Corruption, for instance. It details a number of things that could be done in terms of the laws and whatever. The USG, under Secretary General Dr. Christina Duarte, pointed out the last time the efforts that the help that technology was bringing in place in dealing with corruption, but we found out that impunity still make technology impossible, because okay, with technology you know that the man has stolen the money, but the man is well connected or the woman is well connected, and there is nothing you can do about it. So technology is not only it, impunity is it. And I don't also think that we can rely on the externals alone, because in quite a number of the externals, they take the money, they keep it in their countries, and they use it meanwhile, or in some instances, those money are lost. Whatever Emperor Haile Selassie kept in Europe, whatever Mobutu Sese Seko kept in Europe, all gone. So we need to address all these issues. But like I said, we are far beyond the time allotted to us, and we can continue the dialogue on the EDEP platform. I want to use this opportunity to thank everybody, the participants foremost, because if OSA and LIWA and CAVA provided the opportunity and nobody is attending, it won't be worth it. So we appreciate all of you. We appreciate, having said that, Madam Christina Duarte, under whose auspices we have been able to have this dialogue, to have these 3 live sessions, because all these things involve a lot of funding. We appreciate her and her staff, in particular, Kava and Liwa, and several others working behind the scene. The interpreters who have made it possible for us to listen to ourselves in the 3 different European languages that Africans in the large part use, aside from Arabic and Spanish. Then you would have covered the continent largely. We appreciate and thank them, and thank the, it was Anthony in the first 2, but I didn't get the name of the 3rd colleague that assisted today in making sure that we are able, and of course, Rita, Dr. Rita and Miss Dan, working behind the scene in encouraging us along, in making translations and everything. In I thank everybody. We will continue the dialogue. This is not the end. We should excitedly pick it all up on the discussion forum on the HIDEP platform. Thanks very much. Liwa, do you have anything to add?
No, thank you very much, Prof. I would like to thank the participants for staying with us and being very active, participating in this series of live sessions. Just to remind all of the participants that we already have the first and the second live session posted on the EDEP training platform, and module 3 and 4. And this session will be posted shortly, and the module 5, I think. So just to thank everyone again, and wish you a good day. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think, was it done? Can end?
Thank you, Prof.
Yes, thank you, Joseph. Yeah, Liwa, if our technical colleague can end the session.
Hi, this is the technician. I can end this right now as long as that's okay.
Okay, thank you very
Yes,
much.
thank you. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank
we
you.
really appreciate your support. It's been great, seamless,
Thank you, Prof.
and that's fantastic. Thanks a lot.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
We'll
Prof.
continue
Have a nice
our
day,
own
everybody.
dialogue
Tchau,
elsewhere.
tchau.
Ciao.
Adeus. Au revoir.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Merci beaucoup, professeur.